Hello and welcome back to the Toronto Gamers board game review. I'm Justin, and today I'll be giving you my final impressions, spoiler-free, of Seafall. Now, in this video, because Seafall is a legacy game, which means the elements change as you play, I'll be giving my impressions as spoiler-free as possible, which means they might also be a little bit vague. Now, if you've been following along with the channel, you'll remember that a while ago I gave my initial impressions of Seafall. And if you want a little bit of a catch-up, a little more context on how I feel about the theme, the components, and other elements, you can take a look right over here. As a reminder, before I get into this, we did play a campaign with only 3 players, so all of my impressions are going to be colored with that fact. I do believe that a higher player count of 4 or 5 will lead to a different enough experience, especially in terms of player interaction, to give a slightly different impression of how the whole thing unfolds. So just keep that in mind when you're listening to what I have to say here. So I'm just going to start off with some likes, go on to some dislikes, and give you an overall impression. Again, trying to keep this spoiler-free. So, what did I like about Seafall? Well, as I may have said before, the theme for me was one of the strongest elements of Seafall, especially when it comes to reading the adventures in the captain's book. There are so many interesting little stories and episodes that you can pull in and really use to color your entire impression of the story that's been going on throughout generations in your own individual kingdoms and the kingdoms of others. I also really loved, as I said, the story and how it's dispersed in a way that you get to discover it in your own time. You don't necessarily discover the same things at the same time as someone else in an entirely different campaign will discover. And of course, 2 different campaigns, you might end up going down completely different tracks with some of the stories. Of course, you're going to hit on the same key moments, and they're going to be within a relative frame of time to each other, but I love that there's flexibility enough to give each campaign its own unique experience. I really enjoy how the board is built up over time. When you're adding elements to the board, I felt that a lot of these were wonderful surprises, or really caught us off guard, or were just something you didn't expect, or in some cases were just ways to help increase your own resources and your own abilities over the game. Either way, I really appreciated how the board built up over time. I loved all the elements that made up the game and the mechanics. However, I may not necessarily like the overall way that they came together, and I'll come to that in a little bit. There are definitely, though, some really solid elements, really solid ideas that I appreciate about Seafall. I really love the feel of the game and the idea of it. And of course, the components are fantastic. I absolutely love them. So, what did I not like as much? The rules. Oh, wow. It wasn't the rules themselves. The problem is that there are so many rules and icons and other elements of the game that require clarification. We spent so much of our time on the forums of Board Game Geek just to figure out, what does this rule actually mean? Or what's a clarification of it? Or is this icon something we should be doing something with? There were a lot of issues with unclear rules throughout the entire campaign. We actually ended up with 3 entire games of stalled progress because the iconography wasn't very clear for one of the very important elements. That is probably my hugest disappointment with Seafall, is that they really needed some much better copy editing. As I said, I do love how you discover things in your own time, in your own order. This also means, however, there can be huge spaces of time between when you make these discoveries, or they could just be crammed in all at once before you get that big empty space. I really like the idea of this. I do, however, feel the implementation is weak. If there was a way to tighten some of those frames between different discoveries, I'm not sure how. That would require a lot of playtesting, and it's a very big fix. But I did find that there were some stretches that were almost a bit too flexible. So we wound up with some large downtime, as well as some periods of a lot of events and discoveries happening all at once. So if there's a way to spread it out just a little bit better, that would be something that I'd really appreciate, because it did take away from the experience for us. It does mean, of course, that some games you just feel like you're grinding up your stats rather than actually progressing in the campaign, and that's grinding is not really a feeling I want to have when it comes to playing a board game, especially one that's about 2 to 3 hours per session. I don't want to feel like those entire 2 to 3 hours were spent just grinding up my stats. There are also some issues I felt with the idea of catch-up within single games, because there were some games you felt like there's no possible way I can win this or have a chance, no matter what I do. And it's hard to play a game when you have that sense of helplessness. Some games, however, had too much of a catch-up component. The problem is you can discover ways of getting points, sometimes pretty randomly, and sometimes those discoveries can lead to large amounts of points. So you can either be stuck at the back of a game for a long time and just feel like there's nothing you can do, or someone might completely and quickly overtake all the progress that you've done, or you might be the one overtaking that progress. Either way, the distribution of victory points made it very difficult to have games sometimes where everyone felt like they had a chance at winning, or everyone felt like they had a fair shot. The other side of this is that some games just ended so quickly because some people just landed on some of the victory points at the beginning in huge packets, and the game was over before anyone else felt like they could actually accomplish anything. Sometimes, even if you were the one in that position, you felt like, okay, I got all these points, but what did I really get to do? So the games could end very quickly at times. Another thing that sort of let me down about Seafall was the end of the campaign. The story part of it, to be specific. What they set up at the end felt to us thematically like it stuck out like a sore thumb. It wasn't really peppered in. References to it, build up to it, weren't really spread out throughout the campaign to a level that we felt like this ending made sense. For us, it felt like it was sort of tacked on, or was a little too big, too much. So that was a bit of a disjointed experience at the end for us. So, overall, don't get me wrong, Seafall is not fundamentally flawed. There's a great game in here, it's just not realized. There's a lot of refinement needed to fix Seafall, in my opinion. There are just a lot of little things that aren't quite good enough, or polished enough, or clear enough to make it an experience that doesn't end up being a bit of a letdown. It's a shame, because I was super excited to play Seafall, and within my group, whenever we were having some difficult times, I was with the most faith and most excitement that no, Seafall's going to come back for us, guys. It's not going to let us down. And there really was some fatigue within our group because of all these little things, especially the unclear rules and unclear iconography, that really marred the experience for us. We shouldn't be spending this much time on Board Game Geek looking through forums, trying to find clarifications, and at the same time trying to avoid spoilers, because it's also hard to search for clarifications on rules in a legacy game without spoiling yourselves. The way you progress through Seafall and the timings of it are varied enough that you could have a much more positive experience than we had, or a much more negative experience. So, what I can say to sum up my thoughts on Seafall: there are people who can like this game, and I'm one of them. You just have to go in with the right expectations. And depending upon how the game unfolds, one group could have a great time with it, or a less than great time. The variability of discovery is one of the most amazing things about Seafall, but it's also one of its biggest downfalls, along with the need for a lot more copy editing with the rules. Because those time frames are not quite tight enough and a little too flexible, the variability in experience is a bit too broad. For me, Seafall is a weak recommendation, so I do recommend it, just with a lot of conditions and a lot of caveats to manage your expectations. Those are my thoughts on Seafall. I hope you enjoyed them. If you want to hear more about what the Toronto Gamers are up to, what our next events are, please check out our Facebook at facebook.com/Toronto Gamers. Also, please do share, like, subscribe, comment, all those awesome YouTube things. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for the word to get out about the Toronto Gamers, what we do, and our board game reviews and everything else. So, thanks again for watching, and see you next time.